Hey there folks, Andrew Swan here, bringing you a 2020 update to my tutorial on how to set up motion interpolated deinterlacing using AVISynth, QTGMC, and FFmpeg on Windows 10. Now, there have been a number of changes since the last time I recorded this tutorial, with some new requirements and a number of different rendering options that either didn't exist or I was unaware of before. Before I begin, though, please keep in mind my standard disclaimer. I take no responsibility for anything that happens on your system as a result of following this tutorial. The software I mention is cool, but not necessarily tested for bugs, exploits, and/or malware. If you choose to follow this, you do so at your own risk. Okay? Also, this tutorial is only for Windows 10, and it's designed to show you how to install everything without using wrapper programs, with one notable exception, which we'll get to. Before we begin with the rest of the tutorial, I just want to double check and make sure that for those of you who don't already have a way to extract 7-zip archives, you go and grab the 7-zip from the official website, which is 7-zip.org. Don't just go and grab some random extractor program out there, because some of them have adware and crap like that on them. Whereas 7-zip is open source, free, used by a ton of Linux distributions, as well as having versions for Windows and stuff like that. So it's really worth going and grabbing that instead. So if you go there, just grab the stable version, which will be the sort of regular numbered one, not the alpha, up at the top of the page, and you should probably grab the 64-bit version, although it doesn't really matter per se. Okay. So, AVISynth. Very briefly, for those of you who are coming to this video without seeing any of my others, AVISynth is a scripting language for video, which means that it's kind of like when you go in and program something, you write up a bunch of commands into a text file, and then you run those commands in sequence, right? AVISynth does that with essentially video processing commands. And it itself is not enough to create an image. All it includes in the archive is essentially a library and a scripting language that you can use. You actually have to use other programs in order to, view the results of your script or render it out. And we'll get to that in a bit. Speaking of which, I will have links to all of the programs that I'm going to tell you to download in a blog post, which I will link to in the video description notes down below. And that's the way that I kind of handle most of my tutorials as well. Just because the blog post can change much more rapidly than me being able to take the time to go and record a new version of the video. So if you're looking for a definitive source, go to the blog post. But that being said, it'll still probably help to watch this video to see how some of these things interact. All right. So let's get started. First, we're going to go and download AVISynth Plus, which is the current fork of AVISynth that has a ton of new features, is more stable. I mean, it's better in pretty much every way. And it'll be on the main AVISynth homepage. Go down to AVISynth Plus under Forks and click on Latest Release GitHub. That'll take you straight to whatever the latest version is. When you go down, you'll notice there's a bunch of different versions here. If it's your first time installing AVISynth Plus, what you want to grab is the one that just says, blah, 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 vcredist.exe, which includes a Microsoft Visual Studio or something like that, redistributable. which is required for it to run. If you've already installed a previous version, you can go and grab the files only version and copy it over, or the just sort of plain one that doesn't have a little thing after it. All right, grab that first. Then we're going to go back to the AVISynth homepage and go down to filters and utilities. We're going to be getting both of those. So the deal with AVISynth is that it has what are known as filters. Filters are essentially plugins and scripts that you can use with AVISynth to perform particular functions. Now, these scripts in this context are different than the ones that you write to process a particular video file. They're scripts that call plugins in AVISynth and get them to do particular things. And, it's not super important to understand this for the functionality of AVISynth, but it's a reason why you'll see both what are essentially just text files and then DLL files that are actual plugins. Okay. All right. Internal filters include all the things that are inside AVISynth. External filters, on the other hand, is where we need to go to get all the stuff that's not included. And there's a bunch. The first thing we need to go to is under source filters, because by default, AVISynth Plus will only open up AVI files. That's kind of in the name. And we're probably going to be working with more file types than that. So easiest way to deal with that is to go down and grab FFmpeg source, which uses FFmpeg as kind of a backend to open up files in AVISynth. Just go to the page and click on download and grab the latest version that's shown there. Okay. That will include both a 32-bit and 64-bit version of the plugin. And you're going to find that that's kind of a theme throughout this tutorial, is that a lot of these plugins have both 32 and 64-bit versions. We're going to be using the 64-bit version of pretty much everything, just because there are some advantages to that relating to memory usage and stuff like that. But there are some older AVISynth plugins that will only work in 32-bit. So that's why people still make the 32-bit stuff available. And I might cover that again in a future video or something. But my previous video on installing both 32 and 64-bit versions of AVISynth should still basically work for this. All right, anyway, once we got FFmpeg source downloaded, we need to go down to restoration filters and specifically deinterlacing. There's a ton of these again. All we want to grab is QTGMC, which is over here on the right. And if you click on it, what you'll notice, it's a text file. Yeah, and it's got this .avsi extension. So that's a script that you can either just kind of do a click on whatever your save page as function is on your web browser, or you can just right click on the link and do save link as. Either way will work. Okay. Now, QTGMC, because it's a script, requires other plugins in order to function properly. Now we get to the requirements. All we need for the basic functionality are the core plugins and scripts here, and one other thing, which I'll get to in a sec. One thing that you might want to check before you start going in and downloading each of these is to go to the wiki page and see if a dependency has been added, because periodically when these programs get updated, they may start to rely on another plugin or some other download that you need rather than just the download itself. It's a little bit confusing and, whatever, but it's just good policy to check. So Mass Tools 2, just kind of scroll down to whatever the download area is, and doesn't look like there's anything that you need extra. Although usually on the AVISynth wiki, you'll find downloads sort of this upper right corner for each of the files. So when you checked, you can just go back and click to the GitHub page and grab the latest version off of there. Okay. MV Tools 2. And sometimes it'll tell you in the requirements section of the kind of downloads area here what it'll need. Yeah, there's nothing on here that we need. Okay. So again, you just hit the GitHub page and click on the most recent release. Don't grab the source code. N83. Yep, again, do the same thing here. Grab the latest version. RG Tools. Yeah, and you'll see here that RG Tools requires the Microsoft Visual C++ 2019 redistributable package. Good thing with that is that's included with AVISynth Plus if you grab the VC Redist version. So you don't have to download and install that separately. Okay. You can just grab the latest version of RG Tools from here. Okay. All right. Then there's zs_rf_shared.avsi, which is a script. This was not required last time that I did this tutorial. It is now. So once again, you can just click on the GitHub link and it'll bring up a text file in your browser, and you can do either a save page as from there or right click on the link and do save link as. Voila. Okay. And that's all you need to install AVISynth and QTGMC, except for this one sneaky little thing. Down below the optional plugins, you'll notice this thing that says DFT test, FFT 3D filter, and MV Tools 2, which is in the required plugins. Needs the FFTW3 library. So you want to click on Windows Builds right next to that. And you want to grab the 32-bit version of the FFTW3 library. If you plan on running a 32-bit version of QTGMC, AVISynth, etc., this will work for both, but there are some other plugins that may require you to download and install the 64-bit version of this. So again, in a future video, I may cover using that. But for now, just know that you only need the 32-bit version to get this working. So once that's done, we've downloaded all of the stuff that we need for AVISynth and QTGMC. Back up to the main page. Now let's go down to utilities. I'm going to grab a couple of these. The first is AvsPMod. This is kind of AVISynth's version of an IDE, if you know what that is from programming. It's a development interface that allows you to do things like syntax highlighting and auto-completion. It makes it easier to write AVISynth scripts, and it allows you to quickly preview the changes that you make to those scripts inside the program. So what you want to do is scroll down to where it says, in 2018, AvsPMod development was resurrected. can find the GitHub repository of AvsPMod here. And that'll take you to the most recent versions. Once again, we're going to only be using 64-bit today, but if you plan on using 32-bit AVISynth, you would need to get the 32-bit version of AvsPMod in order for it to read it properly. So that is there. So there's one other thing that we need to grab on utilities, though, and that is under debugging and diagnostic utilities. There is AVISynth Info tool. So what this does is it's a pretty simple program that just checks once you have everything set up and make sure that you didn't overlook something. Okay? So that's what it is. You want to scroll down to the bottom of the first post, click on download. That'll take you to a place where the author's various plugins and programs are located. This is Groucho 2004, who does a ton of work on stuff for various AVISynth plugins. You want to go down to AVS Info Tool, whatever the latest version is there, and click on it, click download, and you're good to go. Okay, one last thing that we have to grab. And that's the program that we're going to use to render out our AVISynth scripts. There are a number of different options that you can use for this. Last time that I did this tutorial, I recommended command line FFmpeg, which is kind of the, straight from the source version of FFmpeg. This is still a viable thing. You can do it. Just type in FFmpeg, go there, click on download, and kind of hover over Windows. And you'll notice that there are two places that you can go to get builds of FFmpeg. Either of these should work just fine. The one downside is that these are 64-bit only. So, unfortunately, Zerno, who was up until fairly recently the maintainer of the official builds of FFmpeg for Windows, kind of gave it up, as happens from time to time. And as a result, nobody is building FFmpeg for 32-bit within the recommended builds that are on the FFmpeg site. There are some third-party places that you can go elsewhere and find it. There are some recommendations for building FFmpeg from source on Windows. I tried that once. And even my sort of stubbornness of, trying to go with original files as much as possible wasn't enough for me to recommend that. It is incredibly intricate, complicated, and difficult, at least on my system. So there are better options out there. And that is why I am going to recommend the following. VirtualDub 2. For those of you familiar with the original VirtualDub, VirtualDub 2 is a fork in much the same way that AVISynth Plus is a fork of the original AVISynth. It adds a bunch of different features. Now, there are a couple of things that are different. The capture functionality is not as good with sort of like older capture hardware and stuff like that. But for everything else, including the stuff that we're going to be doing today, VirtualDub 2 is amazing. It's one of my favorite programs out there. In particular because it has FFmpeg built in, but has this nice relatively easy to use graphical interface for interacting with it. So just go there, hit download. Awesome. And that's all the stuff that we need to download for today. What we should next do is head on over to VirusTotal or your trusted virus scanner of choice and scan every last single thing that we just downloaded. Just to check, just to be sure that nothing has crept in. VirusTotal is not 100% effective in catching these things, especially if they're 0 days, but it's a hell of a lot better than just running and praying. Okay? So that's my opinion on that. If you get 1 to 3 detections up to the top here, but a bunch of the other programs have not detected something, then in my personal opinion, I tend to lean towards that being something like a false positive. But it depends on a couple of factors, including when the last time that the file was scanned. If it's been more than like a couple of days, go up here to the little reanalyze file thing and click that and rescan it. And if you see more detections, don't run that. Delete it. If, on the other hand, you see less or the same, use your judgment. You know, I personally haven't run into issues with that, but again, I make no guarantees that any of this is safe. All right? Alrighty. Once everything is downloaded and virus scanned, you should have a list of files that looks something like this, and we're going to go through and start installing these one by one. First thing we're going to do is AVISynth Plus. So you can just double click on that. Hit OK. Next. I accept. Before you go on, I'm going to make a recommendation that you don't install AVISynth Plus in Program Files x86. And that's because if you do that, you need to use administrator permissions every time you copy something over. So it's kind of a pain in the butt, especially if you swap things in and out of your plugins folder on a regular basis. But you can go with the default if you want. Just realize that it'll give you an extra step. What I recommend is just going to browse, going down to users, go to whatever the current user is on the system, and installing it there. That way, no permission issues, and it's a little easier to get to, and yeah, I just think it's better overall. All right, so we'll do next. The default options here work pretty well. The only thing that I would say that you might want to check is go down and check this Add AVISynth Script to New Items menu. What that does is when you do a right click, you see this New menu over here. It should add AVISynth Script as an option to that, which will make creating scripts a lot quicker than otherwise. Okay. But other than that, you can stay with the defaults. And again, you'll notice that it's installing both the 32-bit, aka x86, and 64-bit, aka x64 versions. Okay. So just next, install. It may ask you to install Microsoft Visual C++, blah, 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 blah. If it does, and it's the first time that you've done that, it may ask you to restart your computer after the installation. Since I've done it already, it is not going to ask me. So just keep that in mind. Okay? All right, we'll hit finish. AVISynth is now installed. You will also notice that it automatically sort of associates .avsi files with AVISynth Plus automatically. which is pretty cool. So next step up is to find the plugins folder in AVISynth Plus. And this is pretty simple. Basically, just go to your user folder, wherever that is. Oftentimes, this will be under quick access on the left-hand side of your file manager, but if you need to get there a different way, you can go to your C drive, go to users, and go to whatever the named user is. And you'll find it in there, okay? And you'll look for AVISynth Plus. Double-click to open that up, and you'll notice a bunch of different directories and files. Okay, so plugins, plugins plus, plugin 64, plugin 64 plus. Why all these different folders? Well, any folders with the plus on them are AVISynth Plus filters, right? That's where those would go. Anything without the plus on it is where you would put plugins for older versions of AVISynth. Now, as it turns out, most AVISynth plugins will work just fine in the Plugins Plus folder, but just know that there are some out there that you need to put in the non-plus plugins folder in order for them to run properly. As to plugin 64 versus plugins, I think you can probably guess, but plugin 64 is for 64-bit plugins. The just plain plugins folders are for 32-bit plugins. Okay, so we're going to be putting all of our plugins into plugin 64 plus. All right, here's how this works. I'm going to start with FFmpeg source, so FFms2. Double click to open it up. Again, if this doesn't open, you need to have 7-zip installed. And then you can open up the folder inside the archive, and you'll notice there's an x64 and an x86 folder. Go to the x64 folder. Grab the ffms2.dll file, drag it over, drop it into plugin 64 plus. There's other junk in here. You don't need it. Now let's go through and install the rest of the other plugins. So Mass Tools 2, open it up. You'll notice there's a bunch of different options here. Just go straight to x64 and drag over Mass Tools 2. MV Tools 2, again, go to x64, select all the DLL files there, drag them over. Technically, we only really need MV Tools 2, but dpan won't hurt anything. NEDI 3, open it up, go to x64. Okay, this one does require a little bit of thought in order to do. Basically, there are releases here for Windows 7 and up, and Windows XP and before. If you're running XP, I'm sorry, I'm not going to really cover it in this tutorial. For Windows 7 and up, don't worry about the Clang versions. Just go straight to the regular releases, release W07. Most processors that are newer than probably about, I don't know, I'm going to guess and say about 5 years or so, should run with the W7 AVX2 version. If not, my processor I know is just old enough that it only supports AVX and not AVX2, so I'm going to go into that folder and drag over NEDI3. Making sure that this is all within the 64-bit version. Okay. All right, RG Tools. x64, rgtools.dll. Are you getting the idea now? All right, then finally what you want to do is copy over the script files. So QTGMC and the ZS, etc. script file. You can select both of these and hold down Control as you move them over to copy. You do not want to just move these just because you probably will want to save these script files for if you decide to install 32-bit stuff. Okay, so that is AVISynth Plus all set up, except for one thing, which is the FFTW library. All right. This is the most bass-ackwards part of the install process, and unfortunately, there just really isn't an easier way to do this. Okay, click on your C drive. Go to Windows. Scroll down to syswow64. Scroll down a bit past the folders. You ready for this? Okay, open up the FFTW archive. You're looking for libffTW3f-3.dll. Drag it out. Drop it. Immediately rename that file to FFTW3 in caps .dll. Drag out another version of that same file. So libffTW3f-3.dll. Okay? All right. Take the two DLL files, drag them over to your syswow64 folder. Yeah, it looks like I already had them in here. Make sure that you grant administrator permission to copy them. Alrighty. Once those are in, then QTGMC can be run. If you don't put this in, QTGMC will not run. Don't ask me why. And don't ask me why it does this ridiculous install, but that's what it is. Okay. Once that's done, you can close that up, and now we can install our two utility programs. So let's start with AvsPMod. You can put this wherever you want. Again, I would suggest that a nice, easy way to put this is in your user directory, wherever that is. So you can just double-click to open it up, drag over AvsPMod. And if you're only installing the 64-bit version, you can leave it at that. If not, you probably should rename the folder to AvsPMod 64 or something like that, so you can distinguish between them. All right. Now for VirtualDub. VirtualDub 2, so to speak. If you double-click, you'll notice that VirtualDub 2 is not inside of a folder. So you may want to create the VirtualDub 2 folder first. Like so. Open up. Drag the files over. Good news is, that's it. That's all you need to do to install it. All right, one last thing. This again is optional, but I highly recommend it. Go to AvsInfo tool, double-click to open it up. You can just take that folder, drag it into wherever you would like to install it. And now, double-click to open the AvIsynth Info tool folder. There's an installer here, which is useful if you want it to show up in your start menu. Otherwise, you can just go to the files only folder, which is what I generally do. And double-click on AvIsynfo tool. What it'll do is it'll tell you what's installed in your current AvIsynth install. And you'll notice that there's a button for AvIsynth 32-bit and one for 64-bit. Okay, we're going to check the 64-bit version. And I think we're going to get an error here. Yeah. Okay, let's scroll down and see. Okay, it's going to say some stuff in here about function undefined and whatever. The issue here is that the FFTW library technically isn't installed in a 64-bit version. For QTGMC, this doesn't matter. If you're using something outside of it, it very much does matter. So you would normally pay attention to this, but just understand that's what the error is there. Now, if it has some errors about other stuff, then you probably did something wrong in your install process, and you should be ashamed of yourself. No, just go back and fix it. All right. But you'll notice here that this also lists things like what plugins you have installed here. So you'll notice that these are 2.6 plugins, 64-bit, all of the scripts that you have in the folder, as well as where your plugin directories are installed, AVISynth DLL, what version of AVISynth you have installed, and all the rest. Other cool thing up here, do you see where the processor thing is? It tells you a couple of things that are really useful. The first is what instruction sets are present on your processor. So you'll see here that I've got AVX, but no AVX2. It also tells you physical cores and logical cores. That will be useful when we go to actually setting up our script, because it has to do with how multi-threading works in AVISynth Plus. Okay? So this is useful information all around. All right, let's exit out of that. Now, let's back up. And I'm just going to minimize this, close this, and go to a directory where I have a test file here. So this is a mini DV video capture, which is an ancient digital video format from the mid to late 90s or so. Key thing that's important about this is that it is definitely interlace standard definition video. So you're going to see how we're going to deinterlace it now. Let's start with the following. Right-click, go to New, do AVISynth Plus Script. Let's rename this to something. I'm just going to do test here, but you can name it whatever you want. If you double-click on this, what will probably happen, is that it'll come up and ask you for an option. All right, now I'm maybe burying the lead a bit here, but what we're going to want to do is open this up in AvsPMod. So if we go back to our user directory, go to AvsPMod 64 or whatever you named that folder, and double click on AvsPMod, you may get this warning, in which case you say run anyway, and voila, AvsPMod. So you can open the files through here, but what you should do is go over to Options and click on Associate AVS Files with AvsPMod. Do you wish to continue? Yes. Disassociate AVS files for all users. Yes. Hit yes. And now, if I refresh this window, let's see if this works. Yep, cool. We now can open up our AVISynth files directly into AvsPMod, which is good because we're going to want to do that. Now, to save some time, I have sort of a little boilerplate script here that I'm just going to copy paste. And we'll take a look at that. And don't worry, I'm going to go through this kind of line by line and explain what I'm doing here. So the first line is set filter MT mode. For a lot of filters and plugins and such in AVISynth Plus, you may not actually need this anymore. A lot of them are just sort of detected as being multi-threaded and will work just fine. I'm just a slight bit paranoid, so I include this. And I'm putting this here also to kind of show you what the real format of the commands are like. So set filter MT mode, and then a space, and then in parentheses, you put the name of the plugin that you want to set a multi-threaded mode for. So in this case, it would be QTGMC, then a comma, then a space, then a number, and that number determines the multi-threading mode. Generally speaking, 2 is fine. There are some plugins where you may want to switch that to a different mode. They will usually tell you somewhere in the documentation. All right. Once we've done that, FFmpeg source 2 is what we're going to call. And that's our source plugin. So, once again, in parentheses, we put the name of the file we want to load in quotes. So in this case, that's going to be this one. I'm just going to right-click, do properties, select the name of the file, and paste it in here. The good old Control V. You can do paste up here if you're lazy for some reason, but you can see the keyboard shortcuts up here for copy paste if you don't know them. All right. Then a comma, a space, and then a track equals 1. Most of the time, this should load up audio from the file that you're trying to load up in FFmpeg source 2. If it doesn't, what you can do is add a minus. So it's a track equals -1, and that usually will find the audio file because it's sort of mapped in a weird way or something like that. Okay. For other numbers, that generally only makes sense if you have multiple audio streams inside of your file. This is something that you don't generally find in professional video or just standard video captures or things like that. This is more for people who are working with MKV files that have multiple language tracks or something like that. So anyway, that's something for a different video, but that's what it is. Okay. You may or may not need this next line. In my case, I have to include this because MiniDV uses a kind of funky chroma subsampling. If you don't know what that is, it's essentially a way of saving bandwidth in a video. It goes back to the days of analog color TV, where they needed to find a way to fit color information into a very narrow signal. And as a result, what it is basically is that it reduces the resolution of color information versus what's essentially black and white information, or luma. So in the case of MiniDV, it's what's known as 411 chroma subsampling, which means full resolution, black and white image, and quarter resolution of these two other color channel things. If you want to learn more about it, you can go and do some research on Wikipedia and stuff like that. But point being, what this convert to YV12 command does is it converts the video to 420 chroma subsampling, which QTGMC can deal with. QTGMC specifically, it'll actually tell you on the page here, if I go back a bit. QTGMC specifically will deal with 2 types of chroma subsampling. YV12, which is essentially 420 chroma subsampling, and YUY2, which is 422 chroma subsampling. The latter is a lot more common in professional video. And so if you have a video that's in either of those, you don't need this convert to YV12 command. Okay. And there's no real benefit to switching to YUY2 in this case because the original video has sort of worse chroma subsampling. So anyway, after that, there's assume BFF or assume TFF. Way interlacing works is that it draws essentially a pair of so-called fields in sequence. Each field is kind of like a half resolution frame, but it's drawn every other line on screen. And by alternating the pattern in which these lines are drawn from one field to the next, you have this thing where the lines on one of the fields draws over the gaps between the lines in the other fields. That's interlacing. All right. Anyway, point being, there are two different field orders that determine which field is sort of drawn first. There's top field first and bottom field first. General rule of thumb on that is that top field first is more common in sort of more modern video, like if you're working with a DVD or something like that, or with professional video. BFF is generally more common in consumer video. But that being said, there's exceptions to these. And I'll show you how to check and make sure that you have the right one. But generally speaking, if you're dealing with old standard definition video, it's generally okay to try BFF first. Okay. Then QTGMC. QTGMC, if we go onto the page here, has an absolutely gigantic number of options. I am not an expert in all of these options. I just play around with stuff and see what works. And for my money, most of the time, a simple preset is all you need. Now, there are some people who are going to disagree with me on this, and that's totally fine. Go in, try stuff out, do what you like. This is a change from the last tutorial that I did where I recommended source match and a bunch of other stuff. I find that in some cases that can reduce the perceived sharpness of the image a bit, but there are some cases where source match and a couple of other options can lead to less interlacing artifacts in certain types of video. So I don't want to discount it. I'm just saying that that's kind of advanced level stuff. All right. I recommend preset equals slower. And that's, again, has to be in quotes. That to me gives kind of the best bang for the buck, so to speak, where you're not taking an absolutely ice age amount of time to run the script, but you still get really solid quality out of the deinterlace. Aside from that, eddy threads, and here we run into the first instance where it's important to know how many cores your processor has. The recommendation from the QTGMC page is to set this to half the number of physical cores that you have in your system. So unless you're running on an absolutely ancient CPU, you're probably going to be at least running a dual core system. If it's dual core, set it to 1. If it's more than that, like in this case where I have 6 physical cores on my processor, so I'm going to set that to 3. If you run into instability during rendering or previewing the image or something like that, the first thing that you change is eddy threads, and you put it down. You can put it down to 1, and again, the performance difference is not that much. So it's kind of like, it's a nice thing to be able to set higher, but the performance boost is not that significant if you can't. Okay? Then there's a resize operation. Now this I have to explain a bit because the way that analog video looks by default, why don't I just go ahead and comment out a couple of these lines so you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. All right. Incidentally, if you want to preview your script at any point, you can just hit the F5 key on your keyboard, and it will let you preview stuff. Okay, so you'll notice here in the image, if you look closely, that this has some nasty interlacing on it. This is, again, the original image here. What you're actually seeing are a pair of interlaced fields put on top of each other. And you might think, oh God, that looks super ugly. Well, if you play it back at full speed, which this is not quite, you really don't notice it, especially if it's on an old analog television, because that's the way it kind of draws the image. And anyway, you can get what is essentially the equivalent of 60 or 50 frames per second, depending on your region, that looks super smooth, even though it's only using the bandwidth of half of that. And that's why they used interlacing in the first place. All right, anyway. What you'll notice, however, when this guy turns around, is that he's looking a little bit squished vertically. That's not by accident. The reason why it's squashed like this is because old analog televisions would slightly vertically stretch the image. Don't ask me why. They just do. As a result, when you bring it into the computer, which can only see so-called square pixels, the image looks slightly squished. Now, if you're loading a standard definition video file into an editing program, or indeed into a lot of playback software, it will automatically detect that it's standard definition video and correct the pixel aspect ratio difference on the fly. However, because we're converting this video from traditional standard definition interlaced video into a progressive format, it will not automatically detect the pixel aspect ratio when you go to play it back. As a result, it's generally good practice to fix that with a resize operation. Okay? There's a couple of options for this too. I'm showing you the NTSC version here, which again is North America, as well as Japan and I think Brazil as well, a couple other countries. But if you're in Europe or the UK or something like that, you may have video that's in PAL, and PAL runs at a different frame rate. It's essentially 25 frames per second versus 29.97. And it has a different resolution. So your resize settings will be different for PAL. And I'll leave a little bit of a description of that in the blog post for those of you who are in a PAL territory and are working with PAL video. Okay. All right. What you're trying to do is take this video, which is 720 by 480. Again, this is NTSC video. So that's what the standard resolution for standard definition video in NTSC is. Okay. You're trying to convert that to a square pixel version. You can either do that by enlarging the video, which is what we'd be doing here by going to 720, 540, otherwise known as 720 by 540. I do that when I want to create sort of a master file. that I will be using either to import into a larger resolution video project, say for like HD or greater resolutions, or you can change it to 640 by 480. And that is more appropriate if you want to deinterlace something and then put it straight out there for viewing. In particular, if you're trying to put something up on a streaming service, a lot of them will request standard definition video in 640 by 480 deinterlaced, and usually at 29.97 frames per second. Okay? We'll get to that in a bit. But let's assume for the moment that I want to upscale this a bit. So I'm just going to do that. And let's do QTGMC and see what happens. Oh, one last thing though before we do, prefetch. You remember when we looked at what logical processors we had on the system? That's essentially the number of virtual cores that we have. So if you've got 6 cores and it's a hyper-threading processor, like on Intel, I forget what AMD's variant of this is, but it has something similar. Anyway, it can essentially split a core virtually and make it behave like 2 separate cores. That's the number of logical processors. What you want to do for prefetch is take the number of logical processors and move back by about 2 usually to give yourself enough overhead so that you can run stuff without it getting bottlenecked. All right, so in this case, I have 12 logical cores, which I am then going to reduce by 2, and that gives me prefetch of 10. Okay, this is really important for performance reasons. Okay, once all that's done, we can save our script, hit F5 just to double check, and it looks like it's working. What you'll notice down here in the bottom right is that we've changed our aspect ratio to 4:3, which is standard definition with square pixels. And if we just use the left and right arrow keys, we can sort of advance frame by frame and see that indeed, even though we're at 59.94 frames per second, we're getting perfectly clean, discrete frames. And that's the beauty of QTGMC. All right. So what happens, though, if instead of it looking nice and clean, we get the following? See that? I'm not moving back and forth with the left and right arrow keys. I'm advancing a frame at a time. That's what happens when you set the field order wrong. So in this case, it's set to assume TFF, and that means we can change it to assume BFF, refresh, and it's working properly. Okay? That should cover the basics of how to create a basic QTGMC script within AVISynth. You can, of course, do an additional resize after this to a larger resolution. If you're dealing with anamorphic widescreen content, you could actually just go and resize that directly to whatever your final resolution is, and that should look pretty correct. You can also do different resize methods. I do bilinear in this case because I don't want to add any sharpening to the image. QTGMC already does a little tiny bit of sharpening by itself. And in a lot of older video, you may have some built-in video noise that you may not want to accentuate. If you do want to do something like that, then you can go with, I forget how it's actually pronounced, but it's like Lanços. Let's see. Yeah, Lankzos or something like that, resize. Or my personal favorite is Spline 64. So if I just hit F5, it's kind of subtle unless you look close, but it definitely sharpens the image a bit. What I will say is that you want to save this sharpening resize or any sort of sharpening filter that you put on the image until the last step in order to avoid accentuating noise within the image as much as possible. Okay, so I'm just going to change this to bilinear. Save that. Okay, so again, you can do that, but I just do Control S. And now our script is done. Cool, right? All right. Something else to note. You see this ffindex file here? The first time that you load something up, either to render it or to preview it, when you're using ffmpeg source, what'll happen is ffmpeg source will go into your file and create this ffindex file, which is kind of like you can think of it as kind of a helper file that tells it where particular frames are and stuff like that. It's important in order for it to have decent performance and accuracy when it's trying to sort of seek through the file. So it can make it look like AvsPMod is crashed or something like that. But don't worry, let it go for a bit. You can check with Task Manager to make sure that it's actually doing something. And it should generate that. If it freezes up and doesn't generate the ffindex file, then you know you have a problem. Okay. So how are we going to then go about rendering this? Well, that's where VirtualDub 2 comes in. Okay, if we go over here to our VirtualDub 2, and again, we're going to, there's a bunch of different program files here. What we want is virtualdub64.exe. So that's the 64-bit version of VirtualDub 2. Okay, we can load that up. And we can grab our AVISynth script here, drag it over, drop it, and in a sec, look at that. As an aside, the original VirtualDub was the original method that people used to use to preview AVISynth scripts. It used to be a bit of a pain in the ass because anytime you made a change, you had to close the script and reopen it again. But that has been fixed in more recent versions, such as VirtualDub 2. And now you can preview. And not just that, but if you go into Tools and go to Script Editor, boom, you can actually edit your AVISynth script in here. All right, so let's say that I wanted to change this to something ridiculous. Just go there. Yeah. Okay, so you can make a change in here, hit F5, and it'll update in here. Pretty cool, right? Now, the only reason why I wouldn't use the VirtualDub 2 script editor right off the bat is because it doesn't do auto-completion stuff and some of the other functionality that makes AvsPMod a bit easier to work with for stuff like that. But it is a really handy thing to have. So, all right, we've got our script together. We're sure that everything is looking good. Couple last things you can do. You can actually do filters inside of VirtualDub itself that are VirtualDub specific filters. So you could go in, for example, and do a resize within here. You can do a bunch of other stuff, right? And that's going to be all under video filters, okay? But in this case, I think I'm okay just leaving it as is. So let's go to video and go to compression. And this is where you will set what your output video codec is going to be. There's a bunch of options here. If you just want to watch something, you can go down and click on X264 8-bit and click on configure and set your CRF number here, which is kind of like a quality-based setting. So generally speaking, you can go, you go to a lower number for higher quality, a higher number for lower quality. It's an inverse quality scale. Generally speaking, I think for professional stuff, the recommendation is somewhere between, I don't know, 18 and 23 or something like that. But you can set this whatever you want. I'm just going to set this to 18. Okay, and if you do that, you would want to also set the audio compression by going down and selecting full processing mode. Then going back up to the audio menu, clicking on compression, and selecting FFmpeg AAC. And make sure you set the bit rate that you want for that. So, default's probably fine for the most case because AAC is more efficient than MP3, but yeah, do OK. And then you just do File, Save Video, and go from there. In this case, I'm going to set compression to FFmpeg Apple ProRes because I'm an editor. And that means that I'm usually converting this stuff to edit in a project. So you can select that, then go to Configure, select the profile, which will give you whatever your current sort of flavor of ProRes that you want to use. I'm going to set it on high quality and set the quality level here to 5. That's going to be pretty darn high quality. You usually can get by with something between 9 and 13 for the settings here, and that's perfectly fine for most uses. But if you absolutely want to retain every last little bit of detail, you can go to like 5 or 4 or something like that and get great quality but ridiculously large file sizes. So even though it's ridiculous, it's still less than uncompressed video, though, by quite a bit. So keep that in mind. Just do OK. And for audio, you can go over to compression and do no compression PCM. That's just sort of a good, easy way to fix that. Again, for professional codecs, you want to go for no compression PCM because that's usually what they will expect. Okay, then let's go over to File and do Save Video. Now, you don't want to just leave these options as is. In particular, the Save As type will determine what container, otherwise known as wrapper, that you're using. You can do different video and audio codecs in a bunch of different wrappers. And if you set this wrong, you can end up with a file that doesn't play properly. So just to give you guys a couple examples here, if you're dealing with H.264, then you want to set this to MP4 MPEG-4 part 14 with an MP4 extension. Okay. For ProRes, you don't want to do that. You want to set it to QuickTime MOV. Otherwise, it will not work. All right. And then make sure that you know where you're exporting this out to. I'm going to send this to the same directory to be lazy. But that's where it goes. And when you're finished, just hit save and it'll render it out. A couple of cool things about VirtualDub 2. You get to see the output as it renders versus some other solutions. And it'll give you things like a video rendering rate, which will tell you how quickly the video is being rendered. I wouldn't put a huge amount of stock in the total time estimated, because that will fluctuate quite a bit over the course of the render. If it's a long enough render, though, it should kind of settle down into a relatively accurate benchmark. It's more useful to look at the current video and audio measurements here. So current video frame, current audio sample, and that will tell you sort of what you're on versus the total number of frames and samples, and help you gauge that a bit more easily. Video data will tell you how large the file is currently and what the kind of bit rate of the encode is at the moment, although it's what's being output, not necessarily the encode, not necessarily the bit rate of the file itself. When you go to play it back, that's different. Audio data, it'll tell you how large the audio information is. Projected file size can give you a ballpark estimate of how large the eventual file is going to be, which can be useful if suddenly you see something that's like 100 gigabytes for a 2-second file or something like that. Okay, cool. So we can close this now, and I'll close this out as well. And let's take a look at our original file here.
Okay, well, this is our...
What you'll notice is that this is playing back in VLC, and looks okay. It automatically corrects for the pixel aspect ratio, but it's playing back at what is essentially half the effective frame rate, which is the same thing that you'll get in editing programs as well, incidentally. Just because of the way interlacing works, you can only cut on pairs of fields, and it's a whole separate thing. But anyway, looks okay as is, but
straw bale sample wall,
not particularly smooth. Let's check out our render. And look at that.
Okay, well, this is our...
So you'll notice two things. The first is that it runs much smoother, and the second is, if you look down at the shirt here, the jaggies on it are essentially gone. And that is what deinterlacing can do. So let's just take a look at the original again.
Okay, well, this is our...
Yeah, you see that? See how this is kind of jagged down here? So it gets rid of that, and it smooths out the motion. And that's the benefits of deinterlacing. Now, you will notice in this case that because I'm doing ProRes, the file size is considerably larger. If you were going to something else, it wouldn't necessarily be that large. It depends on the settings that you use and such. But that is how you can deinterlace standard definition video, upscale it, and make it look real nice. Some of you guys are probably going to have some questions about this. You can leave them as comments below the video. Just if you are going to come to me with like a specific issue that you're having, make sure that if you get to the point of being able to actually kind of preview something in AvsPMod, send me your AVS script. Just copy the text from it and paste it into a comment. If it's something where AVISynth is throwing up an error, or you can't get something to run at all, then what I will tell you to do, guaranteed, is to first run AVISynth Info tool and check and make sure that your install is actually working properly. If you get some errors from that, let me know what those are. Again, you can just literally copy paste them, and that'll help a lot. All right. Hopefully, I will have some additional videos to this in the future where I explain some of the other options that you can do and things like that. But I'm pretty busy these days, so at the bare minimum, what I'm looking to do is maybe one video like this a year, so that any updates that happen in the intervening time, I can go in and just kind of run you guys through so that you're kind of kept up to date. But if you do have any questions in the intervening time, feel free to leave a comment. If you have something where you're, looking to do a project and you want to hire me to do something or something like that, then email me. There's a link to that again on the blog. Okay? Aside from that, thanks so much for watching, and until next time, happy video editing.